His lawyer's face went white. I mean, completely white. Like someone had drained all the blood right out of him. Jonathan Reed, the most expensive divorce attorney in North Texas, the man who never loses, stood there with trembling hands, flipping through documents he clearly did not expect to see. My husband Daniel Miller sat next to him, and I watched his confident smirk melt away like ice cream on a hot sidewalk. Pure terror replaced it. The man who told me to get out of his house in Plano. The man who said I didn't have a case. The man who thought he was about to take everything from me. He finally understood. He had already lost, but let me tell you how I got there. The courtroom in Collin County felt colder than it should have. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of how quiet everyone had become. The benches were half full, yet no one spoke. Even the shuffle of papers seemed deliberate, restrained, as if the room itself knew something irreversible was about to happen. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my back straight, my eyes forward. Across the aisle, Jonathan Reed stood frozen. Just minutes earlier, he'd been relaxed, confident in that practiced way expensive attorneys carry themselves. His jacket was perfectly tailored, his tie carefully chosen. He had nodded at the clerk as if this hearing were just another item on a very long list of wins. Now his fingers trembled as he flipped through the documents again, slower this time, as if reading them twice might make the numbers rearrange themselves into something more favorable. They didn't. Beside him sat Daniel Miller, my husband, still legally at least. I watched his expression shift in stages. First confusion, then irritation, then something I hadn't seen on his face in a very long time, uncertainty. The confident smirk he'd worn for weeks softened, collapsed, and vanished. His shoulders tightened, his jaw locked. Fear reached him before I did. This was the man who told me to get out of his house in Plano, the man who said I didn't have a case, the man who believed, without hesitation, that he was about to take everything from me. He finally understood. He had already lost. But that realization had not come suddenly. It had been building for weeks, quietly and visibly, long before we ever stepped into this courtroom. 7 weeks earlier, I still believed my marriage was intact. My name is Hannah Miller. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed stability came from not rocking the boat. Daniel ran a successful real estate investment firm. I had once worked as a financial analyst, but after our daughter Emma was born, I stepped away. It made sense at the time. Emma needed me. Daniel earned more than enough. I could always return to work later. That's what he told me. That Tuesday evening started like any other. I was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup while Emma worked through math problems at the dining table. Outside, the late Texas sun cast long shadows across the backyard. Everything felt normal enough that I didn't recognize it as the last ordinary moment we would have. Daniel came home early. That alone should have warned me. He loosened his tie, set his briefcase down, and sat at the table across from Emma. His voice was calm when he spoke. Casual, even. I've already talked to my lawyer, he said. You don't have a case. I turned toward him slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He simply stated it as a fact, like the weather, like a schedule change. Then he told me he had filed for divorce that afternoon, that he expected me to cooperate. That fighting, it would only make things harder for everyone. He said this in front of our daughter. Emma's pencil slipped from her fingers and rolled onto the floor. She didn't cry right away. She just looked at me, confused, waiting for me to say something that would make the moment make sense. I didn't. I pulled her into my arms instead. Daniel sighed, irritated, not angry, just inconvenienced, as if emotions were a delay he hadn't planned for. He told me I had 48 hours to pack what I needed and leave. His house, he called it. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, I sat on the edge of her bed and watched her breathe. I tried to replay the past year in my mind, searching for a warning sign I could have acted on sooner. There were plenty. I just hadn't named them yet. Late nights at the office, financial decisions I was no longer included in, documents I signed without reading closely. Trust, I learned, is very efficient. It saves time. It also creates blind spots. The next morning, while packing boxes in the bedroom, I found a folded bank statement wedged behind the nightstand. I almost threw it away. Almost. The balance was lower than it should have been. Not by a small margin, by enough to make me stop and look again. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my bag. At the time, I didn't know what I was holding. I only knew that the numbers didn't match the story I'd been told. And for the first time since Daniel spoke that sentence so confidently at the kitchen table, I didn't feel panic. I felt alert. The apartment in Frisco smelled like new paint and someone else's detergent. It wasn't unpleasant, just unfamiliar. The kind of place designed to be temporary, where nothing quite settles because it doesn't have to. Emma chose the bedroom without hesitation and arranged her stuffed animals on the bed as if this were an overnight stay, not a move. Children are practical that way. I slept on the couch that first night, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic. Every noise felt louder without the weight of the house in Plano wrapped around it. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't restless either. I was thinking. The next morning, after dropping Emma off at school, I sat alone at the small kitchen table and pulled the bank statement out of my bag. I smoothed it flat and studied it the way I used to study reports years ago, slowly, without assumptions. The balance didn't make sense. I knew Daniel's income. I knew our expenses. I knew the rhythm of our finances well enough to recognize when something was off. There should have been more money in that account, not a little more, a lot more. I didn't jump to conclusions. Numbers don't like being rushed. I logged into the accounts I still had access to and started comparing months side by side. I wasn't looking for theft. I was looking for behavior. Patterns reveal themselves when you stop asking them to confess. At first, everything looked normal. Income reported consistently. Expenses categorized neatly. Transfers labeled with reasonable descriptions. If I had been scanning quickly, I might have missed it. But I wasn't scanning. I noticed small withdrawals that repeated themselves every quarter. Not identical amounts, but close. Always timed the same way, always explained just well enough not to raise questions. Money doesn't move like that by accident. I closed my laptop and sat back. This wasn't chaos, it was design. That afternoon, I received an email from Daniel's attorney. Polite, firm. It outlined the settlement Daniel was offering. Generous, it said, considering the circumstances. I would keep my personal belongings, my car, minimal spousal support, child support calculated strictly on reported income. I read it twice. Then I noticed what wasn't there. The house, the investments, any acknowledgement of assets acquired during the marriage. I didn't reply. Instead, I made a list. Things Daniel had handled exclusively in recent years, accounts I hadn't seen statements for, documents I had signed without reading closely. Trust is efficient. It saves time. It also hands over control quietly. Over the next few days, I began to notice changes outside the numbers. Friends didn't call as often. Texts went unanswered. When I did hear back, the tone felt careful, measured. One woman I'd known for years suggested we talk soon, and then never followed up. Daniel had been speaking, not aggressively, thoughtfully. He framed everything as concern. He told people I was overwhelmed, emotional, struggling with the separation. He never accused me of anything outright. He didn't need to. Concern spreads faster than accusations. The most unsettling discovery arrived by mail, an envelope from our health insurance provider. I opened it absent-mindedly, expecting routine paperwork. Instead, I learned that Emma had been removed from Daniel's policy weeks earlier. No warning, no discussion. Just a decision. I stared at the page for a long time, waiting for the panic to arrive. It didn't. What I felt instead was clarity. This wasn't about money. It was about leverage. That night, after Emma fell asleep, I lined everything up on the table. The bank statement, the settlement email, the insurance notice. 3 separate pieces. One story. Daniel hadn't just prepared for a divorce. He had prepared to win. And he had done it the same way he did everything else, by assuming I wouldn't look too closely. I thought back to the sentence he'd spoken so confidently in our kitchen. You don't have a case. He believed that because he believed I had stopped being who I was before the marriage. The woman who noticed details. The woman who trusted numbers more than reassurances. I folded the bank statement again and placed it back in my bag. I wasn't ready to confront him. I was ready to observe. And for the first time since leaving the house in Plano, I understood something important. Daniel wasn't careful because he was smarter. He was careful because he thought no one was watching. I didn't start by looking for something big. That was the mistake most people made when they suspected wrongdoing, assuming the truth would announce itself loudly. Large transfers, obvious gaps, numbers that screamed. Daniel was smarter than that. So I went small. I started with accounts that barely mattered, the ones we rarely discussed, the ones that existed more out of habit than necessity. An old savings account, a minor investment fund tied to one of Daniel's early properties. Nothing impressive, nothing that would have concerned me before. That's where I found it. A secondary account I didn't recognize. It wasn't hidden behind passwords or layers of encryption. It appeared cleanly in the system, labeled in a way that suggested routine use. The balance was modest, almost disappointing. If this had been all there was, I might have closed my laptop and convinced myself I was overthinking things. But the timing was wrong. Deposits arrived shortly after income from Daniel's business was reported. Withdrawals followed days later, often routed elsewhere. The account never held money long enough to feel real. It was a pass-through. Money doesn't pass through accounts for no reason. I took screenshots, saved copies, logged dates and amounts. I didn't annotate with guesses, only facts. That night, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Just checking in, he said, his voice casual. Too casual. Making sure you and Emma are settling in okay. We are, I replied. A pause. I sent over the settlement offer, he continued. I think it's fair, given everything. Okay, I said. Another pause, longer this time. He was waiting for something. Resistance, anger, a question. I gave him none. After we hung up, I wrote down the time of the call and exactly what he said. Not because I needed it for court yet, but because habits matter. People reveal themselves in repetition. The next few days followed a pattern. Daniel called. I answered briefly. He spoke. I listened. He reminded me that his lawyer was experienced, that dragging things out would only hurt Emma, that cooperating now would make everything smoother later. I thanked him for the advice. Each conversation ended the same way. Him slightly unsettled, me unchanged. Silence makes people nervous when they expect noise. By the end of the week, I had identified 3 more accounts connected indirectly to Daniel's business. None of them were dramatic on their own. Together, they formed a shape. Money left the main operating accounts in predictable cycles. It flowed through small, forgettable places before disappearing again. Not spent, not lost, parked. I reached out to Rachel Kim that night. We hadn't worked together in years, but we'd started our careers in the same department. She knew how I thought. I trusted her instincts. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I think my husband is hiding money, I said. She didn't laugh. She didn't sound surprised. Carefully? She asked. Yes. Then he thinks you won't look, she said. That's useful. We met 2 evenings later at my apartment in Frisco. Emma was asleep in the bedroom. The lights were low. The table was covered in papers, and my laptop sat open between us. Rachel scanned silently for a long time. He's not moving money randomly, she said finally. He's moving it away from visibility. From me? I asked. Rachel looked up. From everyone. That was the moment the story changed. This wasn't just about divorce strategy. This wasn't just about making sure I walked away with as little as possible. Daniel was protecting something bigger. We worked for hours, mapping connections and timelines. Rachel pointed out inconsistencies I had sensed but hadn't yet named. Certain expenses didn't align with reported revenue. Some funds appeared to vanish entirely. This isn't sloppy, she said. It's practiced. That night, after Rachel left, I sat alone at the table long after midnight. I thought about the man I had married, the confidence, the calm certainty with which he made decisions, the way he had told me, without hesitation, that I didn't have a case. He wasn't bluffing. He believed it, because his plan depended on one assumption, that I would react emotionally, that I would confront him, that I would tip my hand before understanding the game. I wasn't going to do that. The next morning, I responded to his lawyer's email. Briefly, politely, I asked for clarification on a few minor points. Nothing urgent, nothing revealing. Daniel texted later that afternoon. Glad to see you're being reasonable. I stared at the message for a moment before putting my phone face down on the table. Reasonable, I had learned, was what people called you when they thought you were losing quietly. I wasn't losing. I was watching. And the first thing Daniel had hidden, the smallest thing, had told me everything I needed to know about the rest. The change didn't happen all at once. It arrived in small disruptions, subtle enough that I might have missed them if I hadn't been paying attention. Daniel started calling more often. Not frantic, not angry, just present, checking in, asking questions that sounded harmless but weren't. How was Emma adjusting? Had I spoken to my lawyer yet? Was I finding the paperwork confusing? Each question carried an expectation. I answered carefully. She's doing fine. I'm reviewing everything. I'm taking my time. The conversations always ended the same way. Daniel polite, controlled, but not entirely satisfied. Silence hadn't unsettled him yet, but it was beginning to. At the same time, the world around me grew quieter. Friends I'd spoken to weekly stopped reaching out. Invitations disappeared. When I ran into familiar faces at the grocery store, conversations felt cautious, incomplete. Daniel had been speaking again. He never said anything directly false. He framed his comments as concern about my emotional state, about how hard the divorce was on me, about whether I was coping well enough to make rational decisions. Concern is persuasive. It makes people step back without asking questions. I didn't correct the story. I didn't defend myself. Letting a narrative run unchecked can be dangerous, but only if you need approval. I didn't. What I needed was time. Rachel and I continued our work quietly. We didn't chase every account. We followed behavior. That was where Daniel made his mistakes. As pressure increased, his movements became less precise. Transfers happened closer together. Descriptions grew vague. One payment was miscategorized entirely, a small error but revealing. Stress leaves fingerprints. Late one evening, after Emma was asleep, Rachel paused over her screen. "He's accelerating," she said. "That usually means he's worried about something." "Me?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, about being seen." The next morning, an email arrived from Daniel's lawyer. A deadline. Firm, imposing, designed to provoke urgency, to force a response. I read it carefully, then forwarded it to my attorney, Laura Simmons, with a single line. No rush, just reviewing. Laura called me that afternoon. "He's trying to push you into a corner," she said. "They think you're behind." "I know," I replied. "And you're okay with that?" "Yes." There was a brief pause. Then Laura said, "Good. Let them keep thinking it." That was the moment silence stopped being passive. It became deliberate. Daniel called that night. "I'm just trying to make this easier," he said, impatience edging into his voice. "Dragging things out isn't good for anyone." "I understand," I replied. "You don't sound like you do." Another pause. He was searching for confirmation, any sign that his pressure was working. I didn't give it to him. After the call, I noticed something new, a transfer routed through an entity I hadn't seen before. Small, almost careless, as if he assumed no one would notice now. I noticed. Rachel noticed. Patterns were forming faster than we expected. 2 days later, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Michael Torres, Daniel's former financial assistant. The message was brief. "Can we talk somewhere private?" We met at a quiet cafe near Addison Circle, far enough from Dallas to feel anonymous. Michael arrived early, his hands wrapped around a coffee he didn't drink. "I'm not trying to get involved," he said immediately, "but I thought you should know. Things aren't as clean as they look." He didn't accuse. He didn't dramatize. He explained. Invoices reclassified, transfers that didn't align with project timelines, instructions he'd been given to delete certain records after quarterly reviews. "I kept copies," he said quietly. I didn't know why, I just knew I should. He slid a slim folder across the table. I didn't open it there. I thanked him. When I brought the documents to Laura, she was silent for a long moment. "This explains why they're rushing," she said finally. "They don't want discovery to widen." Daniel's silence followed. No calls, no messages, just pressure through legal channels. Deadlines tightened, language sharpened. Silence had become a problem. For him. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, the evidence spread neatly before me, I realized something important. Daniel believed control came from speaking first, from setting the narrative, from forcing reactions. He hadn't considered what would happen if I refused to react at all. I closed my laptop and turned off the light. Tomorrow I would respond. Slowly, precisely, on my terms. Not to argue, not to accuse. Just to let the truth continue doing what silence had already started. By the time Daniel realized something was wrong, it was already too late to correct it. Not because I had done anything dramatic, but because I hadn't. I responded to his lawyer's deadline exactly 2 days later. Not immediately, not at the last possible moment, just late enough to signal uncertainty without disrespect. I asked for clarification on a few technical points, language any reasonable person might stumble over. Nothing confrontational, nothing revealing. Daniel called that evening. "You don't need to overthink this," he said, his voice edged with something new. Not anger, concern mixed with impatience. "My lawyer has handled cases like this hundreds of times." "I'm sure he has," I replied. Silence followed, not mine, his. He was waiting for reassurance, for resistance, for something he could push against. I gave him nothing. Underestimation is a quiet gift. People stop guarding what they believe is already theirs. Rachel and I kept working, but we slowed down on purpose. We didn't chase every thread at once. We picked one pattern and followed it to completion before moving on. That discipline mattered. That's when we noticed the timing. Daniel's transfers increased every time pressure rose. After a legal email, after a missed call, after a delay. Money moved when he felt watched. Not large sums, just enough to adjust positioning. "People reveal priorities under stress," Rachel said. "This tells us what he's protecting," Laura agreed. "He's rearranging the board," she said during one of our calls, "which means he's worried you can see it." "Can they?" I asked. "Not yet," she replied, "but they will." We prepared quietly. Laura filed narrow discovery requests, specific, technical, unthreatening on the surface. No broad accusations, no dramatic language. Each request appeared reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a net. Daniel's lawyer responded confidently at first, dismissive even. Several requests were delayed. Others were answered incompletely. That was useful. Every gap told us where to look next. Then came the mistake. A document arrived mislabeled, a spreadsheet attached to the wrong response. It referenced an internal account number we hadn't seen before. Rachel froze when she saw it. "That's not supposed to be there," she said. We traced it. It led back to a holding company registered years earlier, one Daniel had never mentioned. The transactions tied to it were sparse but precise, clean enough to pass initial review, dirty enough when you followed them far enough. We didn't confront it. We waited. That evening, Daniel called again. This time, he didn't try to sound relaxed. "I feel like you're dragging this out," he said. "It doesn't need to be this complicated." "I'm just being careful," I replied. "With what?" "With everything." He exhaled sharply. "You don't need to play games." "I'm not," I said, and it was true. After the call, Laura sent a short message. "They're asking for a settlement conference." Rachel smiled when I told her. "They want to close before discovery opens wider," she said. "That's not confidence." It was urgency. The next few days unfolded slowly, deliberately. Daniel's lawyer sent increasingly detailed messages. He tried persuasion, then firmness, then concern again. I remained consistent. Polite, calm, slightly unsure. It was exhausting to play that role, but effective. Michael reached out once more. "They're cleaning house," he said quietly. "Deleting things they think are old." "Are they?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "and they're missing some." When I shared that with Laura, she didn't smile. "They always do," she said. "That's why silence works. It gives people space to make mistakes." The settlement conference was scheduled for the following week. Daniel believed it would end things. He told me as much in a text message that night. "This is the last step. After this, we can all move on." I read it twice before setting the phone down. He thought movement meant resolution. He didn't realize it meant exposure. That night, I organized the evidence one final time, not to add anything new, but to understand what we already had. Patterns, timelines, behavior under pressure. Daniel had assumed control came from speaking first, from asserting certainty, from convincing others before they could look too closely. But certainty without awareness is fragile. As I turned off the kitchen light and headed to bed, I felt something settle. Not excitement, not fear, balance. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't just working. It was closing in. The settlement conference was scheduled for a Monday morning. Daniel treated it like an ending. He texted me the night before, reminding me to bring identification, as if I might forget. He said his lawyer believed we could resolve everything quickly if I came prepared to be reasonable. Reasonable again. I didn't reply. That morning, Laura and I arrived early. Not because we were eager, but because being early meant being unhurried. The conference room was plain, neutral, a table, chairs, a pitcher of water untouched. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late. He looked confident. Not relaxed, confident. He shook hands with his lawyer, nodded at Laura, glanced briefly at me. His expression carried the faint impatience of someone who believed he was already waiting for something overdue. The meeting began exactly as expected. Jonathan Reed did most of the talking. He framed Daniel's offer as generous, final, clean. He emphasized efficiency, stability, closure. He implied, again, that prolonging things would only complicate Emma's life. Laura listened without interrupting. When it was our turn, she asked one question. Can you clarify the flow of funds through the Miller Development holding entities? Jonathan blinked. Which entities? He asked. The ones registered in Nevada, Laura replied calmly. Specifically those referenced in your own production. Daniel shifted in his seat. Jonathan recovered quickly. He dismissed it as routine accounting structure. Nothing unusual, nothing relevant to settlement, he said. Laura nodded. Understood, she said. Then full disclosure shouldn't be a problem. The room grew quieter. This was the moment Daniel had overlooked. Not the big reveal, not an accusation, but the simple request to explain what had already been partially revealed. The pattern. Rachel had spent hours mapping it. Money left Daniel's operating accounts on a quarterly schedule. It moved into small intermediary accounts, just long enough to avoid attention, then flowed into a Nevada holding company. From there, it vanished from view. Not spent, not taxed. Held. What Daniel hadn't erased was consistency. The same timing, the same structure, the same careful absence. People who hide things well forget that repetition creates evidence. Jonathan pushed back, suggesting the request was outside the scope of settlement. Laura didn't argue. She asked for a recess. In the hallway, Daniel pulled Jonathan aside. Their voices were low but tense. Jonathan gestured sharply once, then stopped when he noticed me watching. I looked away. Silence works best when it isn't confrontational. When we reconvened, the tone had changed. Jonathan proposed narrowing the discussion. Daniel offered small concessions, a bit more support, slightly adjusted terms, all framed as compromise. Laura declined. She slid a document across the table. Michael's documentation. Invoices reclassified, transfers mislabeled, instructions to delete records after reviews. Not dramatic, just precise. Jonathan's expression shifted. Not panic, not yet, but calculation. This appears incomplete, he said carefully. It is, Laura agreed. That's why we're requesting expanded discovery. Daniel spoke then, for the first time. I don't understand why this is necessary, he said, forcing calm into his voice. This is turning into something it doesn't need to be. Laura looked at him directly. That depends on what's there, she said. The meeting ended without resolution. That was the point. Outside, Daniel caught up to me in the hallway. Hannah, he said quietly, what are you doing? I turned toward him for the first time in weeks. I'm listening, I replied. He stared at me, searching for something familiar, something reactive. He didn't find it. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Jonathan Reed filed objections. Laura responded with narrowly tailored requests. Each response revealed another fragment Daniel hadn't meant to expose. Rachel called me one evening, her voice steady. They're scrambling, she said. Transfers are being reversed. Records are being reclassified. That usually means someone is trying to clean up a pattern too late. Michael confirmed it. They're deleting the wrong things. he said. "They don't realize what's already backed up." By the end of the week, Daniel stopped calling entirely. All communication came through attorneys now, formal, guarded, precise. That's when I knew something fundamental had changed. Daniel no longer believed this would end quietly. He believed it might end publicly. Laura scheduled the hearing. Not rushed, not delayed, timed. The night before, I sat at the kitchen table in Frisco, reviewing the final set of documents. Everything was labeled, cross-referenced, verified. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't hopeful. I was ready. Daniel had built his strategy on certainty, on the belief that speaking first, acting decisively, controlling the narrative would secure the outcome he wanted. He hadn't accounted for one thing. Silence doesn't just wait, it records. And once enough has been recorded, it doesn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Daniel moved faster after that, not strategically, emotionally. It showed in the timing of his emails, the tone of his lawyer's filings, the way deadlines suddenly tightened without explanation. He had stopped trying to guide the process and started trying to end it, quickly. Urgency is rarely a sign of confidence. Laura noticed it immediately. "He's rushing," she said during one of our calls. "That usually means he's afraid of what discovery will uncover next." "What happens if we slow down?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "Then he speeds up even more." So we did exactly that. We complied with every request, thoroughly, precisely, and without commentary. We responded on time, not early. We asked for clarification where it was reasonable. We didn't object loudly, we didn't accuse. We let Daniel move first. Jonathan Reed filed a motion to limit discovery scope, arguing that further financial review was unnecessary and burdensome. Laura responded with a narrowly worded opposition, citing inconsistencies already identified in Daniel's own disclosures. Nothing dramatic, just facts. The judge denied the motion. That was the moment the pressure shifted. Daniel called me that night. I hadn't heard his voice directly in days. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said. There was no anger now, just frustration edged with disbelief. "We could have settled this quietly." "Could we?" I asked. He hesitated. "You know this is going to get messy," he said. "I know," I replied. Another pause. He was waiting for reassurance again, for regret, for some indication that I wanted to go back to the version of this where he was in control. I didn't give it to him. "I'm just trying to protect what's fair," I said. The line went quiet. Rachel called the next morning. "He's shifting money again," she said, "fast, not carefully." That was dangerous. Money moved under stress leaves traces. By the end of the week, 2 more inconsistencies surfaced, one involving a property valuation that didn't align with reported purchase prices, another tied to a short-term loan that appeared and vanished within the same reporting cycle. "These aren't mistakes," Rachel said. "They're corrections made too late." Michael confirmed it from inside. "They're panicking," he told me quietly. "He's asking for things to be refiled, renamed, backdated." Backdating is never accidental. Laura requested an emergency status conference. Daniel's legal team objected, too forcefully. The judge granted it anyway. The days leading up to the hearing felt strangely calm. I focused on routine. Emma's school schedule, grocery shopping, laundry folded neatly instead of left half done. Normal tasks anchored me more than preparation ever could. Silence had become familiar. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to unravel. His lawyer sent increasingly detailed messages outlining proposed compromises. Each one offered more than the last, each one framed as generosity rather than retreat. Laura declined them all. "Not yet," she said. The night before the hearing, Daniel sent one final text. "I don't know what you think you're proving." I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "I'm not proving anything," I typed. "I'm listening." I turned the phone face down and went to bed. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom in Collin County felt different from before. Quieter. Not because fewer people were there, but because everyone understood the stakes had changed. Daniel arrived early this time. He didn't look confident. Jonathan Reed avoided my eyes. Laura didn't. We took our seats. When the judge entered, she reviewed the file without comment. She asked questions, direct ones, about timing, about structure, about discrepancies Daniel's team had not adequately explained. Jonathan answered carefully. Daniel did not. When he spoke, his voice carried just enough defensiveness to reveal what he was trying to hide. The judge asked for clarification on a specific transfer. Daniel hesitated. That hesitation was new. Laura followed up with documentation Michael had provided, time-stamped, cross-referenced, impossible to dismiss as speculation. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She ordered expanded discovery. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly at the words. Not defeat, recognition. As we left the courtroom, Laura leaned toward me. "This is where people usually realize they should have waited," she said. Daniel passed us in the hallway without speaking. He didn't look angry. He looked like someone who had moved too quickly and couldn't undo it. Outside, the air felt lighter again. Not triumphant, just clear. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt steadiness. Daniel had believed winning meant acting first, setting terms, forcing decisions, shaping the story before anyone else could question it. He had mistaken speed for strength. By letting him move first, I hadn't cornered him. I had given him room, and in that space, he had revealed everything he thought no one would ever see. The second hearing wasn't dramatic. That surprised me. There were no raised voices, no sudden revelations shouted across the room. Instead, there was a steady, almost methodical quiet, one that left no place to hide. The judge reviewed documents with the patience of someone who had seen this pattern before. Questions were asked slowly, carefully, in a way that made evasion obvious without calling it out. Daniel answered first. He sounded rehearsed, not calm, rehearsed. Each response landed just a second too late, as if he were choosing words rather than speaking truth. Jonathan Reed filled the gaps, adding explanations that sounded polished but hollow. Laura waited. She always did. When it was her turn, she didn't introduce anything new. She simply reorganized what was already on the table. Dates aligned, transfers repeated, descriptions contradicted one another. She didn't accuse Daniel of hiding assets. She asked the court to explain why the same funds appeared under different names, through different entities, at different times. The room grew still. Daniel shifted in his chair. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Miller," she said evenly, "can you walk the court through this sequence?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried again. What came out was vague, circular, the kind of answer that assumes authority will fill in the blanks generously. The judge didn't. She asked for clarification. Then she asked again. That was when I noticed it. The moment Daniel realized this wasn't a hearing he could talk his way through. He wasn't being accused. He was being asked to explain. And explanations require coherence. Laura introduced Michael's documentation. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to anchor the questions already being asked. Time-stamped records, instructions that didn't align with official disclosures, internal notes that revealed intent without commentary. Jonathan objected. The judge overruled. Daniel stopped taking notes. He stared at the table instead, as if answers might appear there if he waited long enough. The ruling came quietly. Expanded discovery, independent forensic review, temporary financial restrictions. No condemnation, no final judgment. Just process. But process, I had learned, is where outcomes are decided. Outside the courtroom, Daniel didn't approach me. Jonathan spoke to Laura in low tones. Evelyn wasn't there this time. I walked out alone. The following weeks unfolded slowly. Too slowly for Daniel. Requests went unanswered. Deadlines slipped. Documents arrived incomplete. Each delay added weight to the record. Rachel called one evening, her voice steady. "They're contradicting themselves now," she said. "Not loudly, but enough." Michael confirmed it from inside. "He's asking people to remember things differently," he said. "That never works." The forensic review began. Professionals who didn't know Daniel, didn't care about the divorce, didn't respond to charm or impatience. They followed the trail. Money doesn't argue with auditors. Emma adjusted better than I expected. She noticed the changes in routine but didn't ask many questions. Children adapt when the ground beneath them stops shifting. She slept through the night more often now. Her teachers mentioned she seemed calmer. That mattered more to me than any ruling. One afternoon, while waiting to pick her up from school, I saw Daniel across the parking lot. He looked smaller. Not physically. energetically, like someone who had lost confidence in where to stand. He noticed me and hesitated, then nodded once. I nodded back. We didn't speak. That silence felt complete. The final hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. By then, the picture was clear. Undisclosed accounts, mischaracterized transfers, patterns that couldn't be explained away as oversight. Daniel's certainty had collapsed into damage control. The day before the hearing, Laura called. "They're offering a revised settlement," she said. "Is it fair?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "and it acknowledges what they can't deny anymore." I considered it. Not emotionally, practically. "What happens if we accept?" I asked. "This ends quietly," she said. "No spectacle." That mattered to me. I accepted. The final hearing lasted less than an hour. Custody arrangements finalized, assets divided according to verified records. Orders entered calmly, without commentary. Daniel didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. As we left the courthouse for the last time, I felt no surge of victory, no relief that demanded expression, just stillness. Daniel had believed winning meant speaking first, controlling the pace, defining the story before anyone else could question it. He hadn't understood that silence isn't absence. It's space. Space for patterns to emerge, space for truth to settle, space for people to reveal themselves without being pushed. And once that space exists, no argument can undo what's already been seen. By the time the consequences reached beyond the courtroom, nothing felt sudden anymore. That was the strange part. From the outside, it probably looked like everything collapsed at once. Decisions finalized, documents filed, structures dismantled. But from where I stood, it felt like the natural conclusion of something that had been unraveling for a long time. The forensic review didn't need drama. It needed consistency. And Daniel had been consistent for years. The auditors didn't care about intent. They didn't speculate about motive. They followed timelines, reconciled discrepancies, and flagged what didn't belong. Their language was neutral, precise, impossible to argue with. Undisclosed income, improper transfers, financial representations that did not align with records. Nothing exaggerated, nothing personal, just facts. Laura explained it to me one afternoon over the phone, her voice steady. "This goes beyond the divorce now," she said. "There are reporting obligations." I understood what she meant without asking. Daniel understood it too. His attorney requested another meeting, off the record, informal. Laura declined. There was nothing left to negotiate that hadn't already been defined by the evidence. The first ripple came from his business partners. They hadn't been involved in the divorce proceedings, but they were listed in the financial review. Their names appeared alongside transactions they didn't recognize, accounts they hadn't authorized. They asked questions. Daniel couldn't answer them convincingly. Rachel heard about it before I did. "They're requesting internal audits," she said. "That usually means trust is already gone." Michael confirmed it quietly a few days later. "They're locking things down," he said. "Access is changing. Roles are being reassigned." He didn't sound relieved. He sounded tired. Daniel stopped trying to reach me after that. No calls, no texts, not even through attorneys. I saw him once more before everything concluded. At the grocery store in Plano, early evening, the aisles nearly empty. I recognized him before he noticed me. He stood near the frozen foods, staring at something without really seeing it. He looked older, not dramatically, but unmistakably, like someone who had spent months holding tension without release. He noticed me and froze. For a moment, I thought he might speak. He didn't. Neither did I. We passed each other without slowing down. That felt right. The final orders arrived by mail a week later. They were unremarkable to look at. Legal language, signatures, dates. But they represented something important. Closure without noise. Emma and I moved back into the house in Plano not long after. I let her choose new bedding and rearrange her room. She picked colors I never would have. Bright, optimistic, unafraid. She slept better there. So did I. The silence in the house felt different now. Not empty, not heavy. Intentional. One evening, while folding laundry, I found an old notebook tucked away in a drawer. It was from years ago, notes from my early career, calculations, observations, margins scribbled in the corners. I realized something then. I hadn't lost that part of myself. I had just set it aside. Daniel had believed the version of me he last needed to acknowledge, the one who trusted easily, who deferred, who stayed quiet for comfort. He hadn't considered the other version, the one who noticed, the one who waited, the one who understood that silence isn't weakness when it's chosen. Laura called a few days later to check in. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said honestly. "You handled this well," she said. "Most people don't." "I didn't do much," I replied. She paused. "That's exactly what you did," she said. After the call, I sat by the window as the evening light settled over the yard. Emma played quietly on the floor nearby, humming to herself. I thought about the sentence Daniel had been so sure about. "You don't have a case." He had mistaken preparation for certainty, control for strength. He had spoken first, and in doing so, he had revealed more than he ever intended. By the time the room finally understood what was happening, there was nothing left to argue, because the truth doesn't rush. It waits. The aftermath didn't arrive with noise. There were no headlines, no public reckoning that demanded attention. Daniel's world didn't collapse overnight. It narrowed, quietly, one door at a time. That felt appropriate. The investigation moved forward on its own schedule, slow, procedural, indifferent to emotion. His former partner stopped calling. His firm's name disappeared from projects he once talked about proudly. None of it was announced. It simply happened. Consequences rarely make speeches. Emma and I settled into a rhythm that felt honest. School mornings returned to their predictable chaos. Evenings softened into routines that didn't require explanation. She asked fewer questions now, not because she didn't care, but because she felt secure enough not to worry. That was the real outcome. Not the assets, not the rulings, not the quiet unraveling of a life built on certainty, safety. One afternoon, while sorting paperwork, I realized I no longer felt the urge to check updates. No need to track developments or anticipate reactions. The story had moved past the point where my attention was required. Silence had finished its work. I went back to work not long after. Nothing dramatic, no announcement. I updated my resume, made a few calls, accepted an offer that valued precision over performance. The first day felt familiar in a way I hadn't expected, like returning to a language I still spoke fluently. Some skills don't disappear. They wait. Occasionally, people asked how I managed to stay so calm through everything, how I didn't confront him sooner, how I resisted the urge to explain myself. I never had a satisfying answer for them. The truth was simple. I learned that silence doesn't mean absence. It means choosing where your energy goes, choosing when to respond and when not to. Daniel had filled every quiet moment with certainty, with assumptions, with declarations meant to close the conversation before it started. I had let him, not because I agreed, because I was listening to patterns, listening to behavior, listening to what people reveal when they believe no one is watching. The last time I saw Daniel was months later, another ordinary place, another unremarkable moment. He looked at me as if he wanted to speak, then looked away. Whatever words he had left no longer mattered. We had already said everything that needed to be said, just not out loud. That night, after Emma went to bed, I sat alone in the quiet house, not thinking about the past, not anticipating the future, just present. Silence, I had learned, isn't something you endure. It's something you use carefully, because when you stop filling the space with noise, your own or someone else's, you give the truth room to stand on its own. And once it does, it doesn't need defending. It doesn't need explaining. It simply remains. Daniel once believed winning meant speaking first. I let him believe that. And in doing so, I learned something far more useful. You don't win by speaking first. You don't win by shouting louder. You don't win by forcing the ending. You win by waiting long enough for the truth to finish the story for you.